Chapter 8. Supporting Your Ideas. An avid tea drinker, Laura Kramer, decided to give her first classroom speech on the health benefits of tea. Part of her speech ran like this. If your family medical history shows that you are likely to develop heart disease, high cholesterol, circulatory problems, or Parkinson's disease, you need to be drinking more tea. Black tea and green tea have been proven to reduce the risk of many serious health problems. I've been drinking tea for years and I am extremely healthy. If you start drinking tea, you can be healthy too. After the speech, Laura's classmates were polite but skeptical. As one remarked, Laura made some interesting points, but she's no doctor. I'd be more convinced if she had provided medical evidence to back up her opinion. Good speeches are not composed of hot air and generalizations. They need strong supporting materials to bolster the speaker's point of view. In Laura's case, there is evidence that tea is helpful in treating some ailments, but most of the claims about its health benefits have yet to be verified by research. So Laura's listeners were right to be skeptical about her vague, unsupported generalizations. The problem with generalizations is that they don't answer the three questions listeners always ask of a speaker. What do you mean? Why should I believe you? So what? Consider the following statements. General, there are lots of community colleges in the United States. Less general, community colleges enroll a large number of students and play a vital role in American higher education. Specific, according to the Department of Education, there are more than 1,100 community colleges in the United States. They enroll some 12 million students each year, which is 44% of all U.S. undergraduates. Which statement do you find the most interesting, most convincing? Chances are you prefer that in the right-hand column. It is sharp and specific, clear and credible, just what a speech needs to come alive. The skillful use of supporting materials often makes the difference between a poor speech and a good one. In chapters 15 and 17, we will look at special uses of supporting materials in informative and persuasive speeches. In this chapter, we focus on the basic kinds of supporting materials, examples, statistics, and testimony, and on general principles for using them effectively and responsibly. Examples. The attack came after daybreak. The Delta Ranger, a cargo ship carrying a bauxite, was steaming through the ink blue Indian Ocean about 200 miles off of Somalia's coast. A crewman on the bridge spied two speedboats zooming straight at the port side of his vessel. Moments later, bullets tore into the bridge and vapor trails from rocket-propelled grenades streaked across the bow pirates. These lines are from an opening of an article in Smithsonian Magazine about modern-day pirates that prey on international shipping. It illustrates a device well known to magazine writers and public speakers. Get the audience involved. See how skillfully this example accomplishes the goal. It gives us specific incident to focus on, the attack on the Delta Ranger. It sets the stage with details of time, place, color, and action. We can almost see ourselves on the bridge of the Delta Ranger, watching the pirates' speedboats and hearing their bullets tear into the ship. We would not nearly be as involved if the article had merely said, "Pirates are a serious menace to the international shipping." Research has shown that vivid, concrete examples have strong impact on listeners' beliefs and actions. Without examples, ideas often seem vague, impersonal, and lifeless. With examples, ideas become specific, personal, and lively. This is nowhere better illustrated than in the Bible and the Quran, both of which use all manner of stories, parables, and anecdotes to make abstract principles clear and compelling. There are several kinds of examples you may want to try in your speeches. Brief examples. Brief examples, also called specific instances, may be referred to in passing to illustrate a point. The following excerpt uses brief example to illustrate the miraculous nature of recent advances in creating artificial limbs for accident victims. Changes in technology have made it possible for doctors to work wonders that once seemed impossible. Roger Charter, for example, lost both of his feet when they were crushed in a truck accident. Now he has new feet made of a springy plastic alloy that duplicates a normal arch. Not only can Roger walk normally, but he can run and play sports again. Another way to use brief examples is to pile them one upon the other until you create the desired impression. Here is how one speaker used this technique to reinforce the point that Mexican Americans have made many valuable contributions to U.S. life. Many of us are familiar with prominent Chicanos and Chicanas such as actress Jessica Alba, boxer Oscar de la Hoya, and guitarist Carlos Santana. But you may be less familiar with other Americans of Mexican origin who have made important contributions to U.S. society. Nancy Lopez played a crucial role in popularizing women's professional golf and won 48 tour championships. Dr. Ellen Ochoa is a former astronaut who logged more than 480 hours in space and invented several optical methods that greatly aid space exploration. Dr. Mario Molina won the 1995 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his research on the formation and decomposition of the ozone layer. Extended examples. Extended examples are often called narratives, illustrations, or anecdotes. By telling a story vividly and dramatically, they pull listeners into the speech. Here is such an example from a speech by Sun Yan, a student at Fudan University in Shanghai, China. Participating in China's National English Language Speech Competition, Sun Yan used an extended example to illustrate the spirit of the Olympic Games. In the history of the Olympic Games, there have been many shining stars. Among them was a European girl. With the lapse of time, her name has faded from memory, yet her unbending spirit shall never perish. It was she who highlighted the Olympic creed. In the lead, though she had been, she stumbled near the terminus and her leg was injured. Competitors passed her from behind in succession until finally only her weak and lonely figure remained on the track. Doctors came and offered to take her away, yet she refused. With the only strength left in her, she managed to get up and shuffled feebly to the end point with drops of blood along her trail. But cheers broke out. Though she failed in the race, the girl won applause from people all over the world. It was she who elucidated the Olympic creed of participation. It was she who instilled perseverance in our minds. This long example captures vividly the courage of the Olympic runner and her personification of the Olympic spirit. The speaker could merely have said, Olympic athletes often display great fortitude, but the story makes the point far more poignantly. Hypothetical examples. All the examples presented up to now have been factual. The incidents they refer to really happened. Sometimes, however, speakers will use a hypothetical example, one that describes an imaginary situation. Usually, such examples are brief stories that relate to a general principle. Here is how one student used a hypothetical example to illustrate the use of honor codes to reduce cheating. Imagine this. You're taking your psychology exam when you notice the student sitting next to you is staring at your answers. You also see his open notebook under his desk. You feel your cheeks redden as you become angry that he may get a high score by cheating while you've worked hard to earn your grade. And you feel helpless because you think telling the professor will do nothing. But now imagine that you attend a school with an honor system. At the beginning of each exam, you sign a statement that says you will not cheat and that you accept the responsibility to report cheating. After the professor hands out the exam, she leaves the room. In this case, you have the power and the duty to report cheaters rather than feel robbed by them. Such a system has worked elsewhere, and it can work at our school. Professor Donald McCabe, president of the Center for Academic Integrity, has surveyed more than 20,000 students at 70 colleges throughout the country, and his research shows that the level of cheating is significantly lower at schools with honor codes than at schools without them. This hypothetical example is especially effective. The speaker creates a realistic scenario, relates it directly to her students, and gets them involved in the speech. In addition, she uses figures from the president of the Center for Academic Integrity to show that honor codes help reduce the incidence of cheating on college campuses. Whenever you use a hypothetical example, it is a good idea to follow it with statistics or testimony to show that the example is not far-reached. Tips for using examples. Use examples to clarify your ideas. You probably use clarifying examples all the time in everyday conversation. If you were explaining to a friend about different body types, you might say, "Look at Professor Shankar. He's a typical ectomorph, tall, thin, and bony." Examples are an excellent way to clarify unfamiliar or complex ideas. They put abstract ideas into concrete terms that listeners can easily understand. This principle works exceptionally well in speeches. Suppose you are talking about suspension bridges. You could give a technical description. The suspension bridge has a roadway suspended by vertical cables attached to 2 or more main cables. The main cables are hung on 2 towers and have their ends anchored in concrete or bedrock. If your audience were made up of people familiar with structural systems, they might be able to visualize what a suspension bridge looks like. But for listeners lacking this background, you might want to add a simple example. 2 well-known suspension bridges are the Golden Gate Bridge. 2 well-known suspension bridges are the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. Because almost everyone has at least seen a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge or the Brooklyn Bridge, using them as examples clarifies your meaning quickly and effectively. Use examples to reinforce your ideas. In a speech titled "The Dangers of Cell Phones," one student dealt with the long-term health risks of cell phone use. She cited figures from the World Health Organization noting that people who use a cell phone for more than 10 years doubled their risk of developing brain tumors. She also discussed other problems associated with long-term exposure to cell phone radiation, including headaches, dizziness, circulatory problems, nausea, and cancer. To reinforce her ideas, the speaker cited the example of Alan Marks, a father of 3 who developed a golf ball-sized tumor in his brain from talking on his cell phone for an hour a day for 23 years. She talked of Mark's health problems and how he would have used his speakerphone or headset if he had known the perils of holding his phone next to his ear day after day, year after year. This example was very effective. It put the medical facts about the dangers of cell phones in vivid human terms that everyone could understand. When you use such an example, make sure it's representative that it does not deal with rare or exceptional cases. Your listeners are likely to feel betrayed if they suspect you have chosen an atypical example to prove a general point. Use examples to personalize your ideas. Most people are interested in people. As a social psychologist, Elliot Aronson explains, most people are more deeply influenced by one clear, vivid, personal example than by an abundance of statistical data. Whenever you talk to a general audience, such as your speech class, you can include examples that will add human interest to your speech. So far in this section, we have seen a number of such examples. The heroic Olympic runner, the incident victim Roger Charter, the accident victim Roger Charter, and so on. The abstract becomes more meaningful when applied to a person. Which of the following would you be more likely to respond to? There are many hungry families in our community who could benefit from food donations. Or, let me talk to you about Arturo. Arturo is 4 years old. He has big brown eyes and a mop of black hair and an empty belly. In all his 4 years on this earth, Arturo has never once enjoyed 3 square meals in a single day. Try using examples with human interest in your speeches. You will soon discover why accomplished speakers consider them the very life of the speech. Make your examples vivid and richly textured. The richly textured example supplies everyday details that bring the example to life. Recall the example on page 143 of the Olympic runner. The speaker provided us with many details about the runner's bravery in the face of adverse conditions. The runner stumbles and injures her leg near the end of the race. She is passed by other competitors until she is alone and left on the track. Doctors offer to help, but she refuses their assistance and shuffles to the finish line with drops of blood along her trail. How much less compelling the example would have been if the speaker had merely said, "One Olympic runner courageously completed her race despite being injured and exhausted." Instead, the details let us see the runner as she battles through her pain and misfortune. She is much more likely to stay in our minds than a brave runner who completed her race. The more vivid your examples, the more impact they are likely to have on your audience. Practice delivery to enhance your extended examples. As an extended example is just like a story or narrative, its impact depends as much on delivery as on content. Many students have discovered this the hard way. After spending much time and energy developing a splendid example, they have seen it fall flat because they did not make it vivid and gripping for listeners. Look again at the speaker in video 8.2. Notice how she uses her voice to increase the impact of her story about the Olympic runner. Like that speaker, you should think of yourself as a storyteller. Don't rush through your examples as you would as though you were reading the newspaper. Use your voice to get listeners involved. Speak faster here to create a sense of action, slower there to build suspense. Raise your voice in some places, lower it in others. Pause occasionally for the dramatic effect. Most important, maintain eye contact with your audience. The easiest way to ruin a fine example is to read it from your notes. As you practice the speech, talk through your extended examples without relying on your notes. By the day of your speech, you should be able to deliver your extended examples as naturally as if you were telling a story to a group of friends. Statistics. We live in an age of statistics. Day in and day out, we are bombarded with a staggering array of numbers. Keith Urban has sold more than 13 million albums. Drowsiness is a factor in 17% of U.S. traffic fatalities. Americans spend $60 billion a year on lottery tickets. The BP oil spill released more than 200 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. What do all of these numbers mean? Most of us would be hard-pressed to say, yet we feel more secure in our knowledge when we can express it numerically. According to Lord Kelvin, the 19th century physicist, when you can measure what you are speaking about and express it in numbers, you know something about it. But when you cannot measure it, when you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is meager and unsatisfactory. It is this widely shared belief that makes statistics, when used properly, such an effective way to clarify and support ideas. Like brief examples, statistics are often cited in passing to clarify or strengthen a speaker's points. The following examples show how two students use statistics in their speeches. To document the number of Chinese students in U.S. colleges and universities, according to the Institute of International Education, nearly 130,000 Chinese students attended school in the United States last year, a 30% increase from the previous year. To illustrate the dramatic increase in pay for professional athletes, ESPN reports that just 20 years ago, the highest paid basketball player made $5 million. Today, the highest paid player makes more than $30 million a year. Statistics can also be used in combination to show the magnitude or seriousness of an issue. We find a good instance of this technique in a student presentation about America's crowded roadways. To demonstrate his point that traffic congestion wastes massive amounts of time and money, the speaker cited the following figures. According to the Urban Mobility Report from Texas A&M University, Americans collectively spend 4.2 billion hours stuck in traffic each year. All told, traffic congestion results in more than 87 billion in wasted fuel and lost productivity. That number breaks down to about $750 per traveler each year. Clearly, we are wasting far too much time and money on traffic gridlock. This is a well-supported argument, but what if the speaker had merely said, traffic jams are very costly for the United States? This statement is neither as clear nor as convincing as the one containing statistics. Of course, the audience didn't remember all the numbers, but the purpose of presenting a series of figures is to create an overall impact on listeners. What the audience did recall is that an impressive array of statistics supported the speaker's position. Understanding statistics. In his classic book, How to Lie with Statistics, Darrell Huff exploded the notion that numbers don't lie. Strictly speaking, they don't. But they can be easily manipulated and distorted. For example, which of the following statements is true? A. Enriched white bread is more nutrition than whole wheat bread because it contains as much or more protein, calcium, niacin, thiamine, and riboflavin. Or B. Whole wheat bread is more nutritious than white bread because it contains 7 times the amount of fiber plus more iron, phosphorus, and potassium. As you might expect, both statements are true, and you might hear either of them depending on who is trying to sell you the bread. One can play with statistics in all kinds of areas. Which of these statements is true? A. A cheetah, clocked at 70 miles per hour, is the fastest animal in the world. B. The pronghorn antelope, clocked in at 61 miles per hour, is the fastest animal in the world. The cheetah, right? Not necessarily. The cheetah can go faster, but only for short sprints. The antelope can maintain its high speed over a much greater distance. So which is faster? It depends on what you're measuring. Put in terms of human races, the cheetah would win the 100-yard dash, but the antelope would win the marathon. When you are dealing with money, statistics becomes even trickier. Consider the following facts. A. In 1940, President Franklin D. Roosevelt earned a salary of $75,000. B. In 1972, President Richard Nixon earned a salary of $200,000. C. In 2010, President Barack Obama earned a salary of $400,000. Which president was paid the most money? In purely mathematical terms, Obama is the highest earner, but a dollar today does not buy as much as it did in 1940, when Franklin Roosevelt was president. One measure of the inflation rate is the Consumer Price Index, which gives us the gauge, which lets us gauge the value of the dollar in any given year against its purchasing power in 1972. If we apply the Consumer Price Index to the three presidents' salaries, we can see how much earned in 1972 dollars. In 1940, President Franklin D. Roosevelt earned a salary of $192,000. B. In 1972, President Richard Nixon earned a salary of $200,000. C. In 2010, President Barack Obama earned a salary of $78,000. In other words, although Barack Obama has the highest salary, the value of his $400,000 is less than half the value of Roosevelt's $75,000. The point is that there is usually more to statistics than meets the eye. When you track down statistics for your speeches, be sure to evaluate them in light of the following questions. Are the statistics representative? Say that you're on your way to class. Say that on your way to class you choose 10 students at random and ask them whether they favor or oppose banning recreational vehicles on public lands. Say also that 6 approve of such a ban and 4 do not. Would you then be accurate in claiming that 60% of the students on your campus favor banning recreational vehicles from public lands? Of course not. 10 students is not a big enough sample. But even if it were, other problems would arise. Do the 10 students interviewed accurately reflect your school's proportion of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors? Do they mirror the proportion of male and female students? Are the various majors accurately represented? What about part-time and full-time students? Students of different cultural and religious backgrounds? In short, make sure your statistics are representative of what they claim to measure. Are statistical measures used correctly? Here are 2 groups of numbers, Group A and Group B. Let us apply to each group 3 basic statistical measures: the mean, the median, and the mode. The mean, popularly called the average, is determined by summing all the items in a group and dividing by the number of items. The mean for Group A is 5,520. For Group B, it's 3,960. The median is a middle figure in a group once the figures are put in order from highest to lowest. The median for Group A and Group B is exactly the same, 5,000. The mode is the number that occurs most frequently in a group of numbers. The mode for group A is 4,400. For group B, it's 5,400. Notice the results. All the measures have the same goal: to indicate what is typical or characteristic of a certain group of numbers, yet to see how different the results are depending on which measure you use. The differences among the various measures can be striking. For instance, the mean salary of a local TV news anchor person is $75,100 a year. But the mean is inflated by the huge salaries of up to $1 million a year paid to a few star anchors in media centers such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. In contrast, the median salary of local news anchors is $59,000. Not a sum to scoff at, but still $16,100 less than the mean. How might a speaker use these different measures? The owner of a television station would probably cite the mean $75,100 to show that local news anchors are handsomely compensated for their work. An organization of news anchors might emphasize the median $59,000 to demonstrate that salaries are not nearly as high as a station owner makes them out to be. Both speakers would be telling the truth, but neither would be completely honest unless she or he made clear the meaning of the statistics. Are the statistics from a reliable source? Which is the more reliable estimate of the environmental dangers of toxic waste in a landfill? One from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or one compiled by the company that owns the landfill? Easy. The estimate by the EPA, which does not have a vested interest in what the figures look like. What about nutritional ratings for fast foods offered by Consumers Union, a highly respected nonprofit organization, or by Burger King? That's easy too, Consumers Union. But now things get tougher. What about the competing statistics offered by groups for and against Medicare reform, or the conflicting numbers tossed out by a governor and the public employee unions protesting against him? In these cases, the answer is not so clear, since both sides would present the facts according to their own partisan motives. As a speaker, you must be aware of possible bias in the use of numbers. Since statistics can be interpreted in so many ways and put to so many uses, you should seek figures gathered by objective, nonpartisan sources. Tips for using statistics. Use statistics to quantify your ideas. The main value of statistics is to give your ideas numerical precision. This can be especially important when you are trying to document the existence of a problem. Examples can bring the problem alive and dramatize it in personal terms, but your listeners may still wonder how many people the problem actually affects. In such a situation, you should turn to statistics. Research has shown that the impact of examples is enhanced when they are combined with statistics to show the examples to be typical. Suppose you are talking about the need for college students to avoid credit card debt. Part of your speech deals with the large amount of debt the typical college student faces by the time he or she graduates. You give an example, you personalize the subject, you provide many details as follows. Travis Blake left college a changed person. Not only had he earned his degree, but he had racked up almost $4,000 in credit card debt. Travis was sure he would be able to pay off his debt once he got a full-time job. But when he received his first paycheck, He found that after paying his taxes and living expenses, he could make only the minimum monthly payment on his credit cards. Rather than getting rid of his debt, he would be paying it off for years. Confronted with his example, a listener might think, "Poor Travis, but I'm not going to end up in his spot because I don't plan to leave college with a lot of credit card debt." Anticipating such a response, a sharp speaker would include figures to quantify the extent of credit card debt among college students in general. According to an article last month in USA Today, the average credit card debt of a graduating college student is $3,100, and new graduates spend almost 25% of their income on debt payments. If someone makes only the minimum payment on his or her credit cards, which is what most people do, they will rack up more than $4,073 in interest charges alone before paying off their original $3,100 debt. Perhaps this explains why in the past few years, the number of people under 25 filing for bankruptcy has increased by more than 50%. Now the audience is more likely to agree that they need to keep a closer eye on their credit card balance. Use statistics sparingly. As helpful as statistics can be, nothing puts an audience to sleep faster than a speech cluttered with numbers from beginning to end. Insert statistics only when they are needed, and then make sure they are easy to grasp. Even the most attentive listener would have trouble sorting out this barrage of figures. According to the World Factbook, life expectancy in the United States ranks 50th in the world. The United States ranks 47th in the world in infant mortality. France ranks 9th. Americans spend more each year on health care than any other nation, $2.5 trillion, or 17.6% of gross domestic product, yet the World Health Organization ranks the U.S. healthcare system 37th in overall performance among member nations. Instead of drowning your audience in a sea of statistics, use only those that are most important. For example, according to the World Factbook, the United States has one of the lowest life expectancies among industrialized nations, plus one of the highest rates of infant mortality. Even though we spend more on healthcare than any other nation, the World Health Organization ranks 36 nations ahead of us in the overall performance of our healthcare system. The second statement makes the same point as the first statement, but now the ideas are not lost in a torrent of numbers. Identify sources of your statistics. As we have seen, figures are easy to manipulate. This is why careful listeners keep an ear out for the sources of a speaker's statistics. One student learned this by experience in a speech titled Tax Reform, Fact versus Fiction. He claimed that the wealthiest 1% of U.S. taxpayers pay 38% of federal income taxes, even though they account for only 20% of all earned income. He also noted that the wealthiest 25% of Americans pay 86% of federal income taxes. These are startling statistics, but because the student did not say where he got them, his classmates were sure he must be wrong. As it turned out, the figures were quite reliable. They had come from a study by the Internal Revenue Service reported in the New York Times. If the speaker had mentioned the source of his speech, he would have been more successful. Explain your statistics. Statistics don't speak for themselves. They need to be interpreted and related to your listeners. Notice how effectively one student did this in a speech about Chinese culture in the United States. Food is another aspect of Chinese culture that has become part of the American life. According to Jennifer Lee's new book, The Fortune Cookie Chronicles, there are some 43,000 Chinese restaurants in the United States. That's more than all the McDonald's, Burger Kings, and KFCs combined. Explaining what statistics means is particularly important when you deal with large numbers, since they are hard to visualize. How, for example, can we comprehend the size of the United States national debt, which is projected to hit $20 billion by 2015? We could explain that a trillion is 1,000 billion and a billion is 1,000 million. But millions and billions are almost as hard to visualize as trillions. Suppose instead that we translate the huge numbers into terms a listener can relate to. Here is one speaker's solution. How much money is $1 trillion? Think of it this way. If you had 1 million and spent it at the rate of 1,000 a day, you would run out of money in less than 3 years. If you had 1 billion and you spent it at the rate of 1,000 a day, you would not run out of money for almost 3,000 years. And if you had 1 trillion and spent it at the rate of 1,000 a day, you wouldn't run out of money for nearly 3 million years. Whenever you use statistics in your speeches, think of how you can make them meaningful to your audience. Rather than simply reciting figures about, say, the continuing destruction of the world's rainforests, find a way to bring those figures home to your audience. You might say, as did one speaker. According to the Rainforest Action Network, rainforest is disappearing at an alarming rate. Within the next second, we will lose an area of rainforest equal to 2 football fields. Within the next 15 minutes, an area the size of this campus will be erased. By this time tomorrow, 214,000 acres, an area equivalent to the size of New York City, will be gone forever. Be creative in thinking of ways to relate your statistics to your audience. This is probably the single most important step you can take to make statistics work in your speeches. Round off complicated statistics. Mount Kilimanjaro is 19,341 feet high. The official world land speed record is 763.065 miles per hour. The population of Libya is 6,461,454 people. The moon is 238,855 miles from Earth. These are intriguing figures, but they are too complicated to be readily understood by listeners. Unless there is an important reason to give you exact numbers, you should round off most statistics. You might say that Mount Kilimanjaro is 19,300 feet high. The world land speed record is 763 miles per hour. The population of Libya is more than 6 million. And the moon is 239,000 miles from Earth. Use visual aids to clarify statistical trends. Visual aids can save you a lot of time, as well as make your statistics easier to comprehend. Suppose you are discussing the declining purchasing power of the US dollar over the past century. You would start by explaining that in 1913, before the United States entered World War I, the dollar was at an all-time high. It fell off during the war, but it regained value during the 1920s. And in 1933, it stood at 80 cents of its 1913 value. By beginning in the 1940s, however, the dollar started a long decline that has yet to end. By 2011, it was worth less than 4 cents compared to 1913. These are interesting statistics, and you could build a good speech around them, but strung together in a few sentences, they are hard to digest. Figure 8.1 shows how much more clearly the points can be made with a simple graph. We shall discuss visual aids in detail in Chapter 14. For the moment, keep in mind that they can be helpful in presenting statistical information. Testimony. Imagine that you are talking with a friend about the classes you plan to take next term. You are not sure whether to sign up for Psychology 230 or Accounting 181. Both are requirements. Both meet at the same time of day. Your friend says, I took those classes last year, they're both good, but Professor Hassam was excellent in Psych 230. If she's teaching it next term, I'd take it for sure. You check the timetable and find that Professor Hassam is indeed slated for Psychology 230. You sign up for her course. As the story illustrates, we are often influenced by the testimony of other people. Just as you are likely to be swayed by your friend's recommendation about which class to take, so audiences tend to respect the opinions of people who have special knowledge or experience on the topic at hand. By quoting or paraphrasing such people, you can give your ideas greater strength and impact. The two major kinds of testimony are expert testimony and peer testimony. Expert testimony. In most speeches, you will probably rely on expert testimony. Testimony from people who are acknowledged authorities in their fields. Citing the views of people who are experts is a good way to lend credibility to your speeches. It shows that you are not just mouthing your own opinions, but that your position is supported by people who are knowledgeable about the topic. Expert testimony is even more important when a topic is controversial or when the audience is skeptical about a speaker's point of view. The following story explains on how one student enlisted expert testimony for a speech on phony pharmaceuticals. The more Leah Giovanni researched her speech topic, the more she became convinced that the growth of fraudulent pharmaceuticals is a serious problem that requires action by the U.S. government. Yet Leah was not an expert on the subject. How could she convince her classmates to accept her idea? Statistics helped, and so did examples, but that was not enough. To reinforce her credibility, Leah cited a wide range of experts who agreed with her, including investigative reporter Catherine Eban, author of a book on counterfeit medicines, Graham Jackson, editor of the International Journal of Clinical Practice, Tom Kubik, head of Pharmaceutical Security Institute, and U.S. Representative Steve Israel of New York, who has sponsored legislation in Congress to deal with phony pharmaceuticals. By citing the views of these experts, Leah made her speech much more persuasive. Peer testimony. Another type of testimony, often used in speeches, is peer testimony. Opinions of people like ourselves, not prominent figures, but ordinary citizens who have first-hand experience on the topic. This kind of testimony is especially valuable because it gives a more personal viewpoint on issues that can be gained from expert testimony. For example, if you were speaking about the barriers faced by people with physical disabilities, you would surely include testimony from doctors and other medical authorities. But in this case, the expert testimony would be limited because it cannot communicate what it really means to have a typical disability. To communicate that, you would need a statement from someone who can speak with the voice of genuine experience, such as in the following case. Isaac Perlman, the world-renowned violinist whose legs are paralyzed, once said, "When you are in a wheelchair, people don't talk to you. Perhaps they think it's contagious, or perhaps they think crippled legs mean a crippled mind. But for whatever reason, they treat you like a thing." There is no way expert testimony could express these ideas with the same authenticity and emotional impact. Quoting versus paraphrasing. The statement from Isaac Perlman is presented as a direct quotation. Testimony can also be presented by paraphrasing. rather than quoting someone verbatim. You present the gist of that person's ideas in your own words, as one student did in her speech about America's potential water crisis. Writing in Audubon magazine, Dr. Peter Bourne, president of Global Water, a nonpartisan educational group in Washington, D.C., said, "Most Americans do not yet realize the extent and urgency of the water problem. At the present rate," he says, "we are headed for a crisis that will change the way we live in every part of the nation." When should you use a direct quotation as opposed to paraphrasing? The standard rule is that quotations are most effective when they are brief, when they convey your meaning better than you can, and when they are particularly eloquent, witty, or compelling. If you find a quotation that fits these criteria, then recite the quotation word for word. Paraphrasing is better than direct quotation in two situations: when the wording of a quotation is obscure or cumbersome, when a quotation is longer than 2 or 3 sentences. Audiences often tune out partway through lengthy quotations, which tend to interrupt the flow of a speaker's ideas. Since the rest of the speech is in your own words, you should put longer quotations in your own words as well. Tips for using testimony. Quote or paraphrase accurately. Accurate quotation involves 3 things: making sure you do not misquote someone, make sure you do not violate the meaning of statements you paraphrase, make sure you do not quote out of context. One of these, the last, is the most subtle and the most dangerous. By quoting out of context, you can twist someone's remarks as to prove almost anything. Take movie advertisements. A critic pans a movie with these words: "This movie is a colossal bore. From beginning to end, it is a disaster. What is meant to be brilliant dialogue is about as fascinating as the stuff you clean out of your kitchen drain." But when the movie is advertised in the newspapers, what appears in huge letters over the critic's name? Colossal, from beginning to end, brilliant, fascinating. This is so flagrant as to be humorous, but quoting out of context can have serious consequences. Consider the following statement by a political candidate: "Creating a national sales tax would provide needed revenue for programs such as education, healthcare, and national defense. Several European countries have such a tax, and it could work here. However, I do not support such a tax here. In fact, I don't support new taxes of any kind." Now look what happens when the first part of the statement is quoted out of context by a competing candidate. Americans already pay too much in taxes, yet my opponent in this election has stated, and I quote, "Creating a national tax would provide needed revenue for programs such as education, healthcare, and national defense. Several European countries have such a tax, and it could work here." Well, my opponent may think new taxes are good for Europe, but they're the last thing we need in the United States. By quoting the original statement out of context, the competing candidate has created a false impression. Such behavior is highly unethical. Be sure when you quote or paraphrase someone that you represent their words and ideas with complete accuracy. Use testimony from qualified sources. We have all become accustomed to the celebrity testimonial in television and magazine advertising. The professional basketball player endorses a brand of athletic shoes. The movie star praises a hairspray or shampoo. So far, so good. These are the tools of the trade for people who endorse them. But what happens when an Academy Award winner endorses a cell phone company? A tennis player represents a line of cameras. Do they know more about these products than you or I? Probably not. Being a celebrity or an authority in one area does not make someone competent in other areas. Listeners will find your speeches much more credible if you use testimony from sources qualified on the subject at hand. As we have seen, this may include either recognized experts or ordinary citizens with special experience on the speech topic. Use testimony from unbiased sources. In a speech about the use of stun guns by police officers to subdue unruly students in public schools, a student said, Steve Tuttle, a spokesman for Taser International, said in a statement that the Taser device has been shown to be medically safe when used on children, and that there's no reason to prohibit its use when necessary to maintain security in public schools. As you might expect, the students' classmates were not persuaded. After all, what would you expect someone at Taser International, the leading manufacturer of stun guns, to say? That its product is unsafe and should be banned? Careful listeners are suspicious of testimony from biased or self-interested sources. Be sure to use testimony from credible, objective authorities. Identify the people you quote or paraphrase. The usual way to identify your source is to name the person and sketch his or her qualifications before presenting the testimony. The following excerpt is from a speech arguing that excessive time spent at work is harming the quality of education for many American high school students. In their book, When Children Work, psychology professors Ellen Greenberger of the University of California and Lawrence Steinberg of Temple University note that intensive levels of work among youth tend to produce higher truancy and lower grades. According to Greenberger and Steinberg, one study after another has found that working more than a few hours a week has a negative impact on teenagers' academic performance. Citing sources. Had the speaker not identified Greenberger and Steinberg, listeners would not have had the foggiest idea who they are or why their opinion should be heeded. As we saw in Chapter 2, identifying the source of testimony is also an important ethical responsibility. If you use another person's words or ideas without giving credit to that person, you will be guilty of plagiarism. This is true whether you paraphrase the original source or quote it verbatim. Citing sources orally. We have mentioned more than once in this chapter the importance of citing the sources of your supporting materials. Careful listeners are skeptical. They keep an ear out for both a speaker's information and for the sources of that information. The bibliography in your speech outline should state the sources you used in constructing the speech. But listeners do not have access to your outline. You have to identify your sources orally as you are speaking. Unlike a written bibliography, the oral source citations do not follow a standard format. What you include depends on your topic, your audience, the kind of supporting material you are using, and the claim that you are making. The key is to tell your audience enough that they will know where you got your information and why they should accept it as qualified and credible. In most cases, you will need to identify some combination of the following: the book, magazine, newspaper, or web document you are citing, the author or sponsoring organization of the document, the author's qualifications with regard to the topic, the date on which the document was published, posted, or updated, the date on which the document was posted or updated. Here is an example of a speech that includes all the above. The power of earthquakes can be seen in more than just the damage they cause. Kenneth Chang, science reporter for the New York Times, reported in the paper's March 13, 2011 issue that the recent quake in Japan widened the country by 13 feet. It also tilted the Earth's axis and shortened the day by a couple millionths of a second. Because the speaker was citing statistics, she needed to show that they were up to date and came from a credible source. In the following example, the speaker is using testimony, but notice how he also establishes the credibility of his source and the recency of the information. Human smuggling is a big business, and the U.S. government has made little headway in stopping it. Just ask Scott Hatfield, Chief of the Human Smuggling Division at Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who was quoted last month in the Houston Chronicle. Anytime we shut down a smuggling organization, there's always somebody to take their place. On the other hand, if you are quoting Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863, about the government of people, by the people, and for the people, you would not need to explain Lincoln's qualifications because he was so well known, or the date of his statement because it does not affect the relevance of his words. The same principles apply if you are citing online sources. It is not enough to say, as I found on the web, or as the internet states. On the other hand, it is not necessary to recite the entire address of the web page. If you are citing a specific person, you should identify him or her in the name of the website on which you found the information, as in this example. In an article posted on MSNBC.com in March 2011, Harry Johns, President and Chief Executive of the Alzheimer's Association, states, "Alzheimer's disease doesn't just affect those with it, it invades families and the lives of everyone around them." If you are citing an organization rather than an individual, you need to provide the name of the organization. The U.S. Department of Agriculture explains on its website that providing nutritious meals and snacks to children in low-income areas during the summer months is critical to improving the health of America's kids. Finally, notice how skillfully the speakers quoted above blend their citations into their speeches. They do not always say "according to" or "as stated by," nor do they use words like "quote unquote." Usually, you can modify your tone of voice or use brief pauses to let your listeners know when you are making a direct quotation. In Figure 8.2, you will find more examples of how you can cite different kinds of sources in your speeches. Keep in mind, however, that the examples are just that, examples. They are presented to give you a fuller sense of the various methods of oral citation. You can use any of the methods with any of the sources, as with other aspects of public speaking. Citing sources orally in your speeches is not a matter of following a rigid formula, but of adapting general principles to specific circumstances. Summary. Good speeches need strong supporting materials to bolster the speaker's point of view. The three basic types of supporting materials are examples, statistics, and testimony. In the course of a speech, you may use brief examples, specific instances referred to in passing, and sometimes you may want to give several brief examples in a row to create a stronger impression. Extended examples are longer and more detailed. Hypothetical examples describe imaginary situations and can be quite effective for relating ideas to the audience. All three kinds of examples help clarify ideas, reinforce ideas, or personalize ideas. To be most effective, they should be vivid and richly textured. Statistics can be extremely helpful in conveying your message as long as you use them sparingly and make them meaningful to your audience. Above all, you should understand your statistics and use them fairly. Make sure your figures are representative of what they claim to measure. and that you use statistical measures correctly, and that you take statistics only from reliable sources. Citing the testimony of experts is a good way to make your ideas more credible. You can also use peer testimony from ordinary people who have firsthand experience on the topic. Regardless of this kind of testimony, you can either quote someone verbatim or paraphrase his or her words. Be sure to quote or paraphrase accurately and use qualified, unbiased sources. When citing sources in a speech, you need to let your audience know where you got your information and why they should accept it as qualified and credible. In most cases, this means identifying the document you are citing, its date of publication or posting, the author or sponsoring organization, and the author's credentials.